হাসান ভাই
হ্যাঁ স্যার বলুন।
হচ্ছে এর পরে সেশনে যারা আছেন দেখে নিন।
হ্যাঁ। So now we are in the final session of the first day of conference, session 6. I have the honor of welcoming Dr. Sheikh Hafizul Islam to introduce the chair of this session. So Hafizullah, are you there? Hafizullah? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Over to you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
আমাদের এই চেয়ার করবেন ডক্টর মোহাম্মদ মুর্শেদ আলম। Dr. Mohammad Murshid Alam is an assistant professor, Department of English, Gaur College. His areas of research include subaltern studies, Islamic tradition in South Asia, Bengal Muslim literary and cultural history, etc. He is the managing editor of Kairos, a journal of critical symposium. Thank you. Murshid Alam da.
Thank you, Hafizur, and thank you, Base, for giving me this opportunity to quote-unquote chair this session. I don't think that I am capable enough, or I do have the intellectual wherewithal to chair Mosarrap. He is someone I look up to very much and I respect very much. I have learned a lot from him and I am still learning from him. And I also have the opportunity to work with him. A very brief introduction to our speaker. Dr. Mosarrap Hossain Khan is Assistant Professor of English at O.P. Jindal Global University, Sonipat, India. He obtained his PhD from the prestigious New York University on South Asian literatures and cultures. Apart from that, I know Mosarrap as the founding editor of a very prestigious online platform called Cafe Dissensus. He came up with this idea of this Cafe Dissensus portal way back in 2010, and in 2011 he published the first issue of this magazine that was dedicated to remapping and re-understanding the Muslim question in India and also in Bengal, and that in a way started a discussion, and Cafe Dissensus became a forum for voices mainly from the marginalized sections of society, and its contribution in the public sphere of India is immense. And I hope everybody will agree with that. Apart from editing Cafe Dissensus, Dr. Khan is now engaged in publishing he is going to publish his translation of the novellas by Shankho Ghosh, and that is going to be published from Oxford University Press. Apart from that, he is also editing a book that is also going to be published from Oxford University Press, and that is on the life and culture and politics of Bengali Muslims. I happen to be one of the I happen to be co-editor of this book, so that is how I got to know more about him and the kind of person and his dedication to work. And apart from that, he is also going to he is working on a collection of short story publication, and that short stories are written by the Bengali Muslims, and he is editing that issue, that book with Dr. Monirul Islam of Presidency University, and that is, I think, going to be published from Hawa Call publication. So he has expertise in editing. He is well published, and he is someone who does not shy away from expressing his views on controversial issues. So I welcome Dr. Mosarrap Hossain Khan to share his thoughts with us. Dr. Khan.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Okay.
You are, carry on.
Okay. I must thank Mursaid first of all, and I'm not even taking his full name because he's a junior and someone very dear to me. We have been working together for a while now, and I must say it's an honor to be chaired because he's one of the most exciting scholars working at the moment. But one of the things about him is he's very extremely low key. So he's not the one to ever talk about his own scholarship or the kind of things he's doing. And at the moment, he's not even in India. He's sitting in, I guess, in Manchester. Mursaid, are you still there in Manchester?
Edinburgh. I am at Edinburgh. Hello?
Edinburgh, sorry. You're sitting in Edinburgh. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, on a scholarship at the moment. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you, Mursaid, for your kind words. And it's always a pleasure to work with you and, to interact with you. Now, before I start, I must thank BASE and especially the people. I know there are many people who are associated with BASE, but I have the fortune, or I would say the privilege, to be associated with some of them closely, whom I have known for years now. Abu, Saleh, Abdul Mutin, Hassan, and I'm sure there are many more whose names I'm not taking at the moment. I'm sorry for that. So I include by saying other members of BASE. It has been a pleasure because we have seen what BASE has been doing for years. The initiative to collect people together, to create a sense of community among Muslims. But I must also add that it's not just creating a sense of narrow identitarian politics among Muslims. It's also reaching the community who are concerned about Muslims in Bengal. That's one thing I like about this organization, and I wish every success to BASE in future. And thank you for organizing this. I remember attending such a meeting back in 2019 in Calcutta at Alia, which was organized at Alia. And this time I would have loved to be in physical form to be there, but just that I'm sitting in Delhi at the moment, in Sonipat to be more precise, on the outskirts of Delhi, and I couldn't be there physically, but I'm there in spirit. Well, to come back to what I'm going to speak on, as you know from my title already, it's Western education and the formation of the Muslim community in colonial Bengal. But I must say, this is an area of research which I've been exploring, but I'm still exploring. So whatever I say today is not going to be, certainly not going to be the final word on this, or not even going to be a more, very refined at the moment. I'm still working on it, and I was very doubtful whether I should speak at this August gathering at all, because I was not sure whether my research is impeccable enough at the moment on what I'm going to speak. But nevertheless, I'm going to speak, and I look forward to comments from my chair and also from the audience. Now, some of the things that I'm going to speak today on Western education may appear repetitive. Many of you might know about it already, but still, I'm trying to map it out. And I can't say that it's going to be a very analytical kind of paper. More, I think it's going to be more of a charting the historical trajectory of Western education in colonial Bengal and how Muslims adapted to it, how Muslims sometimes resisted it, and how sometimes they benefited from it, and which led to something else altogether. So at the beginning, let me map out my lecture a bit. At the beginning of my lecture, I'm first going to talk about the reasons for Muslims' initial lack of access to Western education, or Muslim reluctance to Western education as such. If Bengali Muslims, again, I'm using a term which many do not use now. Some of them use Muslims, Muslim Bengalis, some of them use Bengali Muslims, but anyways, I'm going to use the old term Bengali Muslims. We can use interchangeably. It doesn't really matter which one you use. But first of all, I'm going to talk about lack of access, or why Muslims were reluctant to engage with with Western education at the beginning. And then what exactly happened toward the end of the 19th century, around 1870s, 1880s, when we see suddenly there are a lot of Muslims, especially the elite or educated Muslims, why they took to English education, or why they encourage their kids to take to English education. So this is going to be the first part. Briefly, I'm going to talk about it. And the second part would talk about what was the unintended outcome of this kind of education, because there are certain things that were not expected to come out of this adaptation to Western education, but it eventually happened. And we know the final outcome of 1947, right? So I'm first going to talk about why Muslims didn't take to Western education, and then why Muslims agreed, or Muslims took an interest in Western education by the end of the 19th century, more so by the beginning of the 20th century. And once they took to Western education, what was the outcome of that kind of a decision? So I'm just going to briefly map out, the history of this, of Western education among Muslims in Bengal. Now, in 1871, there was a report published by the Department of Public Instructions of the colonial government, which was called the General Report on Public Instruction. It was published in 1871, and this report, I might quote sometimes, but not always. Now, this report had pointed out that Muslims in Bengal were not very keen on English education for a couple of reasons. One was absence of religious instruction, that Muslims were not very keen on English education or Western education because it did not include religious instruction as such, like it did in madrasas, right? And the second reason was because it was providing more of what we call today liberal education. It was thought to be, English or Western education was thought to be injurious to the morals of Muslim pupils, the students who were studying there. So these were predominantly two reasons which the General Report on Public Instruction in 1871, 1872 suggests that these are the couple of reasons why Muslims were not very keen on sending their kids to English schools. Now, there are other reasons as well, as scholar Aminur Rahman writes, there are quite a few other things. Number one was lack of access to such schools, English schools, because most of the Muslims lived in rural areas and they didn't have access to those schools. Second, of course, again, the same issue of religious instruction. There was no religious instruction in these schools. Third, of course, was again this corruption of morals. So these were the reasons why Muslims didn't take to English education. Now, this by the almost toward 1870s, 60s, and 70s, the English administration, that is the civil servants, also became aware that most of the most of the elite jobs or opportunities were cornered by upper caste Hindus, because they had been training themselves in Western methods of learning for a long time. Let's talk about the Presidency College today, which was Hindu college at the time. And thereafter, we have the Calcutta University, founded, I think, in 1857 or thereafter. Now, upper caste Hindus have been cornering most of these jobs and opportunities. As a result, the English administration or the civil service also thought there has to be a balancing act somewhere, because it was generating a lot of you can say animosity or a lot of unhappiness among Muslims around that time, because it was right after the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857, and anyone who has read W. Hunter's book, the Bengal, the Indian Musalmans. That was the name of the book. Sorry, I'm just once more looking up the name of the book because I keep on forgetting the name of the book sometimes, though we often talk about this book. Sorry, let me look up the name of the book once more. Hunter's book. Yeah, the Indian Musalmans. I'm so very sorry. So W. Hunter, who wrote the Indian Musalmans, which became a pioneering book, in fact, and which talked a lot about Bengali Muslims as well. And he gives some examples of Bengali disgruntled Muslims from Bengal going all the way to Afghanistan to fight against the British, because they were disgruntled because of lack of opportunities, and there was insurgency, or what we today call extremism, growing among Muslims in India, but more so among Muslims in Bengal. And many of them walked all the way, they traveled all the way to Afghanistan, and from the mountains of Afghanistan, they were launching attacks against the British. Now, these things had prompted a rethink among the British how not to antagonize the Muslims anymore, and how to befriend them, and how to give them certain opportunities which were so far exclusively available to the to the Hindu, upper caste Hindus in India, in Bengal more so, because that's our context, right? Now, Hunter, in this book called The Indian Musalmans, gave 3 reasons why English education has failed to attract the Muslim middle class. He said number 1 reason was, of course, the absence of proper language instruction, because English was not being taught to Muslims, because most of them lived in rural areas and they didn't have access to such schools and institutions where English was being taught as a language. Number 2, of course, the lack of Muslim teachers. And as we know, that also creates a kind of sympathetic learning environment if you have a teacher with whom the students could identify to an extent. And I think that's true even today. And the third was lack of a proper curriculum, because Muslims were not entirely convinced about Western education. They wanted Arabic and religious instruction to be part of their curriculum. So these were the 3 reasons Hunter felt that the Muslims in Bengal were not taking to English education. But he very strongly suggested that there has to be some kind of state intervention on behalf of the Muslim middle class. That is, the state has to intervene and create an environment which could set up schools, or which could accommodate more and more Muslim students in those schools, so that they could get exposed to Western education. But at the same time, Hunter suggested that it was not practical to spread thin. That is, it was not practical to enroll a large number of Muslim students from all over Bengal into these English schools. So it would be more practical if the urban Bengali Muslims could be enrolled in such schools, whereas the rural Muslims could still study in madrasas, or they could be given religious instruction. We can see there is a clear, class division already, and that became more accentuated later on. Now, this was one reason why Muslims started thinking about Western education, which is the intervention of the colonial government. After Hunter's book was published, colonial government felt that there has to be some kind of incentive to bring these Muslim students to the English medium schools, or bringing them to the ambit of Western education. This is just one reason, but there is one more reason, and which was equally interesting, which is the economic reason. By the 1960s and 70s, there was a large number of very rich Muslim farmers, and many of us know that they were called the Joddars in Bangla. So there were a lot of these rich Muslim farmers who were growing rich because they were growing, apart from paddy, they were now cultivating jute, which was used by the British, of course. And they became very powerful as a community. So the British wanted their help. They wanted to enlist the help of these Joddars for economic activity. But because of the permanent settlement system, these Joddars didn't have possession of the land. The land was mostly in the possession of the rich zamindars. Now, in 1859, the British government, the colonial government, brought in an amendment to the permanent settlement system. And by the Act 10 of this 1859, by Act 10 of the amendment, it was decided that the Joddars would be given right to the land for a longer tenure, around 12 years. so that they couldn't be immediately thrown out. Now, that was in the interest of the Jodhas that the colonial government amended the Permanent Settlement Act, the system that was in place. But in practice, it didn't always work. In most cases, the zamindars would throw these riots out before the tenure of 12 years was completed. As a result, there was discontent among the rich farmers, the Jodhas in Bengal already. It came to a head around 1873 when there was a conflict between the Jodhas and the zamindars. And around this time, only around this time, the Jodhas understood the importance of Western education. They realized that there's certain kind of legality when it comes to land ownership. And if one had access to Western education, if one could read the records in English, one would be better off because they could see the zamindars were employing, they were educated in, they had a Western education, they were employing lawyers, and they had access to what we call a sense of, we can call a kind of social capital they had acquired over the years. As a result, they could very often win those cases. And the Jodhas felt that there was a need for reforming, there's a need for a reform in the education system. And for the first time, they wanted to send their kids to English medium schools, and they wanted them to be trained in Western education. So there are two reasons I mentioned here. One is, of course, the intervention of the state government, colonial state government, which encouraged Muslims to get to English schools. And the second was, of course, a kind of discontent among the Jodhas or the rich farmers who felt cheated by the zamindars, and they wanted English education for their kids so that they could fight the zamindars in the court of law, because so that their kids could understand legality better. So these were the two main reasons. Now, let me now move to what exactly happened thereafter. Okay, let me quote a little bit from a scholar who says, I quote, "It was in this struggle against the zamindars that the Jodhas became property conscious and developed a keen sense of personal interest in landed property. The struggle also made them aware of the necessity of English education as a means of protecting their rights against the rapacity of zamindars in the law courts." Rapacity, of course, means greediness of the zamindars. For the Jodhas, then, education was not a means to earn a living, but was rather a means for self-assertion against the omnipotent zamindars. This outpouring of positive response to education came at a time when jute cultivation had reached its peak in Muslim-dominated East Bengal. Anyways, many of us have objection to the term Muslim-dominated, but that doesn't matter. The point is that the Jodhas also agreed. You can say this is the first moment when the community itself had decided to send their kids for English education. It was not just coming from the British colonial government. The Muslims themselves, of course, these were rich farmers, but nevertheless, Muslims themselves were thinking of sending their kids to English schools. Now, apart from this, I want to briefly mention two important organizations which also contributed to the encouragement of English education among Muslims around the same time. Very much like BASE is working on in certain areas, the other organizations, we have a history of such organizations in the past as well. Number one is Mohammedan Literary Society, founded by Nawab Bahadur Abdul Latif in Calcutta in 1863. He was educated at Calcutta Madrasa, and he was a teacher of English in Calcutta Madrasa, of course, which is now Alia in a new avatar. He was one of the pioneering figures who, in fact, preferred English and Arabic education. He wanted English education, but at the same time, he said that Arabic education is also important for being rooted to one's Islamic values. So this is one of the pioneering figures who worked and encouraged Muslims to take to Western education. However, his efforts didn't bear much fruit. That's because he was closely working with Sir John Grant, who was part of the Education Commission, and he left for England in 1862. So this didn't really bear much fruit. But it at least helped in changing the outlook of Muslims, especially in Calcutta, to think of Western education as something for more from, you can say, from a career perspective, that it could lead to better career prospects for Muslims. There was another organization uh, which was Central Mohammedan Association, which was founded by Said Amir Ali in 1877. So the first one was founded in 1863, the second one in 1877. So you can see the kind of ferment that's happening around this time in the 1860s and the 1870s. This is also a very sensitive time because of the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857, and we know what happened after that. The British had tremendous sense of revenge against Muslims because they felt Muslims were primarily responsible for the Sepoy Mutiny. And as we know already, even Sir Sayyid had written a book dispelling the British anger against Muslims. So around this time, right after 1857, a lot of ferment in Calcutta was happening among Muslims, elite Muslims in Calcutta. Two pioneering figures I mentioned already, Nawab Bahadur Abdul Latif, and the other one is Said Amir Ali, who is he was a lawyer actually. And as you know, in Calcutta, he has a road named after him. So he ran Calcutta Central Mohammedan Association. These two organizations urged the British government to facilitate the admission of Muslim students in colleges, Calcutta colleges, at a lower fee. Now, these two pioneering figures made possible for the British. We see in 1881, in the Education Commission of 1881, Muslim students were enrolled in, after the commission, Muslim students were enrolled in quite large numbers to Calcutta colleges. That is because the British government at that time was recruiting more Muslim teachers and staff and school inspectors because of the efforts of pioneering figures like Abdul Latif and Said Amir Ali. The British listened to them and they recruited more English teachers, staff, and school inspectors. They increased the number of scholarships for Muslim students, by the way, which was mostly granted from the Mohsin Fund. As we know, this was Haji Muhammad Mohsin who had endowed a fund, and the scholarship was coming from that fund. So by the end, toward the end of the 19th century, we see, as a result of these various efforts first of all, by the British, then these prominent figures and Muslim rich farmers, a sizable number of Muslim students were now getting admitted in Calcutta and in other colleges, but not so much in the rural areas. That was happening mostly in urban Bengal, district towns and Calcutta and such places. But the interesting thing is, and I quote here from Nilanjana Paul, who has a PhD dissertation on education in Bengal, where she writes that, an interesting facet of English education among Muslims in Bengal was that I quote Nilanjana Paul, most elite Muslims suggested that religious education best suited the masses in rural parts of the province. This was mainly because elites wanted to prevent the spread of Western education among the rural masses as they were afraid of competition. Unquote. So within the Muslim community, also we see a kind of division between the elite Muslims and the rural Muslims, not so well off rural Muslims, whose children were mostly attending the madrasas. And this kind of a division was also promoted to an extent by elite Muslims because they didn't want competition for government jobs as such. Whatever little jobs the Muslims could get those days, they didn't want those to be divided and given to rural Muslims somehow. Well, what was the unintended? Now I reach the last part of my lecture. It's going to be very brief. What was the unintended effort of English education among Muslims? Now, first of all, the time we are talking about is, of course, the end of the 19th century. And we see slowly there is a crystallization of identity among Muslims in Bengal, because the first generation of educated Muslims in Bengal also had a sense of homogeneous communal identity, that is, the production or formation of a Muslim identity. And by 1905, we see when the partition of Bengal happened, a section of these Muslims had supported the partition of Bengal. That's because this English education had created a sense of a political community among Muslims. Now, There's some very interesting scholarship by Parna Sengupta on this. Parna, not Aparna. Parna Sengupta on this, and whose book has something very interesting to say, that along with Western education among Bengali Muslims, we see that the space of education, that is the school or college, these spaces became highly politicized spaces. W. Hunter, when he suggested the introduction of Western education, he wanted to reduce extremism among Muslims. He thought if Muslims were given Western education, slowly they will become more secularized. And Bengali Muslims would act like Westerners to an extent. Their religious fervor would come down. But the exactly opposite happened with the introduction of Western education. This is a moment of paradox, actually. What we see after the introduction of Western education among Muslims is that the religious identity further solidified. And there was a reformist zeal among Muslims who were studying in these institutions, who were trained in Western education, because they became more aware of their Muslim identity and they wanted to reform Islam. And let's not forget that this was also the time of reform movements among Hindus and Muslims in different parts of the country. Now, Purna Sengupta has something interesting to say. She says that when English education was introduced and Muslims started taking to English education, Western education a lot, they were self-fashioning. They're fashioning a religious self, where the pedagogic subject and the religious subject kind of coalesced. I'm going to explain this a little bit, what this means. Let me quote first, then I'll explain a bit. Purna Sengupta writes, the pedagogic subject and the religious subject were, in these moments, wholly coterminous. Thus, instruction in science also became a means to instruct the Indian child, whether Christian, Hindu, or Muslim, about the primacy of reason and rationality over superstition. The emphasis on literacy and reason as the heart of modern religious epistemology was part of a more general 19th century reformist impulse all over the world. Modern education did not secularize religious traditions in India as much as it reformulated definitions of religion and religious community as a part of a more global process, unquote. This is from Purna Sengupta. Now, what it denotes is the pedagogic subject was supposed to be one who is questioning, who is rational, who would engage in a dialogic process of learning through questioning and reason and rationality. And unfortunately, I missed out the last session, and I could hear the last part of the discussion about Mutazilis, the kind of rationalistic views they had. But this is not exactly the same. But yet, the pedagogic subject, that is the subject of pedagogy, when we teach someone, a student, let's say in school or college, that subject, the kind of subject that we intend to produce through education, is a pedagogic subject, which is a rational subject, who we encourage to see the world through a rational perspective, right? That's the kind of Western system we have inherited, the kind of pedagogical model we have inherited. That reason is one form of critique, right? But on the other side, we have the religious subject, the believing subject, right? One who believes, one who doesn't necessarily question. Because at the foundation of religion, of course, is belief. One has to believe in something to be a religious subject. Now, these two subjects are very different as such. But in this moment, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, these two subjects, the pedagogic subject and the religious subject, they came together and they kind of coalesced. As a result, these religious Muslims, or Muslims who were religious, let's say, were studying in these schools and colleges, they started also thinking in terms of a reformist zeal of reforming themselves to become better Muslims, so to say. And the same thing happened with Hindus and Christians. It's not just a Muslim phenomenon, by the way. It happened with other religions in India as well. So as a result, we see Western education produced a subject where religion and secularity, or religion and rationality, fused together and produced a distinct sense of identity and community among Muslims. It didn't secularize them. That was the intention of the British government. Instead, it further solidified and crystallized a sense of identity among Muslims. And the space of education became predominantly a space for discussing politics. These schools and colleges became important spaces for discussing politics, because this was the partition time, the first partition of Bengal, and thereafter. So these new subjects were studying in these colleges and schools. They were creating a distinct sense of Muslim identity, and at the same time, they're talking or generating a lot of discourses about the kind of politics that Muslims should be practicing in a country like India, where we know from 1906 we already had the Muslim League was founded in 1906, and Hindus and Muslims were already on a different trajectory altogether by this time. So Western education then, as an unintended consequence, it produced a Muslim subject very aware of his political rights. And this is what led further to the division among Muslims and Hindus, and which would eventually lead to partition, right? And one important example of how the educational space became politicized as a result of Western education is the example of an organization whose name was, let me give you the name of that organization. It was, sorry. The organization was All India Mohammedan Educational Conference. In fact, this was initially set up for the upliftment of education among Muslims, to fulfill their educational needs. But the same organization in 1906 became Muslim League. Now you can see the kind of, fusion education, or the kind of special appropriation these schools and colleges allowed for politics in Bengal. These centers became hub of politics. So much of the political discussion and debate were displaced onto this educational space. So the educational space produced a subject who became intensely Muslim, reform Muslim, and also became political subjects. So I would say, to advance Parna Sengupta's argument, that these schools produce not just a fusion of the pedagogic subject and the Muslim subject, the religious subject. It's also fused together the pedagogic subject, the religious subject, and the political subject. And the result of which was, of course, disastrous, as we see in 1947. Right. So I think I'm going to wrap up now. I've taken enough time. So my argument then is, let me repeat once more. Briefly, my argument then is how Western education by the end of the 19th century and early 20th century in Bengal had not just encouraged Bengali Muslims to participate or partake of jobs in the colonial government, it also, in a way, created a sense of a new religiosity and produced a new religious subject, where the pedagogic subject and the political subject fused together and produced a distinct sense of Bengali Muslim political identity, as a result of which we see the contestation between the Hindu political identity and Muslim political identity, and it led to the partition in 1947. I think I'm going to end this, and I'm open to discussion. As I said, I'm still working on it. It's not that I have everything, I know everything that I had to say. I'm still open to suggestions, questions, and discussions on this. I would like to thank BASE once more for giving me this opportunity. And also thanks to my chair, Dr. Murshid Alam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. It was a brilliant talk to end the day, the first day of the conference organized by BASE. I don't have that much expertise, to be frank, to comment on the paper. I will just, say 2-3 things so that others may join in the discussion. In the 19th century, we also saw the revivalist movement, quote unquote. Sometimes we call them the Wahhabi movement, the Faraiji movement, and they had their own distinct political grammar, and they also fused religion and economics and politics. They were fighting against the jamindars as well as against the British rule also. So from there, you have traced how the introduction of English education has led to a different kind of politics. Maybe the first politics was oppositionary. We can say in that way, And this second politics is in a more or less in the nature of negotiation for rights, and this is what I demand, and demand from the state. So first was oppositionary, second is in a way negotiatory politics. So this is one point that we can take off from your discussion. The second point, how modern English education also led to a kind of self-fashioning. And as you have rightly said, that there are two kinds of pools, one from the above, and another pool came from the below. So the state intervention through policies and scholarships and other things, and on the other hand, there is also the growing need among the Jodhars for this English education. So the pool came from both sides, and ultimately this resulted to new self-fashioning, which is expressed not only in politics, that is also expressed in terms of literature, because we will see later on there would be the formation of Dhaka-based various literary groups, and there would also be groups like Sikha who would talk about in a kind of neo-Mutajilite interpretation of Islam, and where they would talk about reason and harmonizing religion and theology. So that is another, we can in a hindsight say that that was another impact of the kind of on this introduction of modern education. It not only led to a kind of combination of religion and politics, and that is expressed in terms that perhaps led to the partition, as you have rightly mentioned, that was there, but there was maybe another strand that also led to something else, a much more productive, much more inclusive, and that is the second point. And yeah, these are the 2 points I wanted to say. And one more thing, why this sounds very interesting, because I can also see a sort of similarity between the position, the time then and the time I started my educational journey. When I opted for English honors, one of my relatives said that he is actually a Maulana, we can say. He said that you are going for English, you will become atheist. So I am afraid you will become atheist. And so I mean, we had a kind of friendly chats, and he said that. But later on, I saw that that same person sent his own child for English education, and he is now teaching in a college. So this change, change in perspective, that is also there. I mean, we can draw a parallel between the two times, and how this education, adopting the education is also leading to creation of base, or creation of we can say cafe licenses and other platforms. So that parallelism is a way interesting for me. So I will stop here with these 3 points, and if others have any question, please you can have your comments and questions. You can put it directly to the speaker.
And first of all, I must thank you, for such, I would say, very incisive comments that you have, especially the second one. You're absolutely right. Self-fashioning was not just happening in the realm of politics and religion. It was happening in some other, corners, like especially literary production. And as an offshoot of literary production, movements like Buddhir Mukti in colonial Bengal, they're very important, as you point out. Right. So thank you for bringing that to because sometimes what happens, we just lose sight of certain aspects of what is happening. We are so kind of focused on this idea of separatism and things like that I completely ignored the other part. Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you for this. And there's a tremendous parallelism. I remember back in 2019 when we had this conference in Calcutta. Even at that time, I was drawing parallels between base and some of the So the organizations in 1860s and 70s, and this very moment is so very interesting, right? I mean, let's without minting words, we can say there is a sense of separatism also at this very point in time in Bengal politics. Of course, we are not suggesting that it's going to lead to partition or something like that. Of course not. But that distinct sense, and where is it coming from? Of course, because of the emergence of a new generation of scholars and students who are now who have partaken of English education, Western education, and the moment is very similar to what was happening 100 years ago. There's a tremendous kind of parallel between these two moments. And also, to come to the second point again, because of the kind of education we're noticing, or the educational activities among Muslims in Bengal now, we also see a lot of these literary productions, magazines, journals in Bangla, in English,
Exactly.
edited by Muslims in Bengal. There's a lot of ferment, very interesting times actually, I would say. Yeah, thank you for these points.
Any question, please? Any discussion point you want to push here? Any comment?
May I?
Yeah, please. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, আমি just রাফাতদার কথা বলতে যাচ্ছিলাম, রাফাতদা জয়েন করেছেন।
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Khan, for such a brilliant paper. I really enjoyed. I mean, like, it was so enlightening. I in fact had the same thoughts which Murshid had. In fact, I was not only thinking about the reformist, the revivalist strain from Shah Waliullah itself, which is right after Aurangzeb. There is a revivalist strain, but even coming down to the Tablighi Jamaat, for instance, which has a very strong hold on the mass. All the movement that we've spoken about so far is all limited to, even the Deoband is to a great extent limited to the kind of scholarly section, but the Tablighi Jamaat. So I was wondering, given on one hand these kind of the other self-fashioning, and would they have, and on the other hand, the kind of westernization, Western education creating a Muslim subject that you're talking about, which is having a paradoxical effect of creating a more communal subject, if that is what you were saying, and which is a problem for, it is something which is creating a kind of a contender for the modern West, their idea of a secular. It is their notion of a secular, which is a norm, an idea of the political, and they are creating a kind of an image of their own selves in the Muslim, which they cannot tolerate. So more than for the Hindus, it's becoming a problem. It's going to become a problem for the West, and whose repercussions I think we are continuing to see even to today. When you talk about the offended Muslim, the angry Muslim, it is this Muslim which has not got. So do you think that the other revivalist strain in the Tablighi Jamaat or the Deoband movement and all, there is a room for reconciliation with modernity from there rather than this one?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I doubt if I have the answer to this question. But what I find fascinating about this particular question is also you are sort of dividing this religious subject into kind of two categories. One is, which paradoxically looks more malleable, which is the Tablighi version of it, because that's not political in a sense. But the kind of self-fashioning that happened, the kind of religious subject that was produced through Western education, is the one who is very political in a way. And that's what we see in colonial Bengal and India as well, right? Much of the political awareness that came was because of the second kind of religious subject, who was also at the same time a very political subject. And Tabligh had for always, it has claimed that it has nothing to do with politics as such. They are what you can call an organization given to preaching mostly about the religion and producing a pious subject, not a political subject as such. Right now, if I get the question right, you are asking whether organizations like Tabligh could work with the West better than the others kind of subject, the more political subject or
That's right. That's
yeah,
exactly what.
yeah.
Though
So
I have doubts about it myself.
yeah, I know. This is in the realm of, I would say, speculation at the moment, of course, whatever we are going to say here, because uh, as such, we have seen, even Tabligh may not be a political organization, but what happened at the beginning of COVID in India, in fact, it was a Tabligh meeting in Delhi, which was accused of spreading corona at the time in India, because they had come for a gathering in Delhi somewhere. Now, that subject can be politicized in a way, but I would say Tabligh was very restrained in its response, even at that time in India, in the beginning of 2020 when Corona had struck. I never saw any angry kind of retort from their side. They were very defensive even at that time. So going by that, I don't know if really, this kind of a pious subject or an organization is like Tabligh could be more malleable, because they do not necessarily see themselves as contenders for the political space in India uh, than many other organizations like, say, IMEM, or in Bengal, ISF, or what is it called, Indian Secular Federation, I think. Yeah,
Front.
Front.
Indian
Yeah,
Secular Front, yeah.
Indian Secular Front. Maybe those are more contending or more angry kind of organizations than Tabligh. So could be. I'm not sure. I don't have an answer to this question, but could be. They could be more malleable. And I think in most cases, sometimes I've seen in this kind of an angry world, uh, more given to passion for various things, which you call hurt sentiments everywhere. I think organizations which are not so political may be better equipped to create a space for negotiation than the ones which are tremendously political. Now, I'm kind of talking in a very in an apolitical sense, I know, because anything that we talk is political, I know it. But
Yes.
I think sometime, because when, the agenda of both parties are so political, it becomes very difficult to create a space for negotiation. And that's where I think, the spiritual space is very important. I think something similar I heard in the last lecture, I mean, in the discussion toward the end, that this pious subject could be far more malleable. And because, spirituality is such a thing where I think, there is always a possibility for people to come together than the space of politics. That is, I don't know, as I'm growing old, I'm realizing this more and more, I suppose, that, that this is a space where people can actually hold a dialogue. They can speak to each other. And a Hindu organization which is given to, entirely to spiritual work could work better with an organization like Tabligh than to contending political powers. That is, I don't know, I feel that is a possibility, but what your question has opened up also that kind of a possibility. So thank
Yes.
you for this question. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I got my answer. Because I feel like, I've been reading this person, Tim Winters, Abdul Hakim Murad, and he says as long as the conflict is between McDonald and McJihad, it will never end. But
Right.
if, yes, but if, and if, of course, even the Tabligh starts taking up a very political kind of image, that also will not work. But as like you rightly put it, on the other side of the table is not the state, but the church, maybe, with a more spiritual. I think that is where we are looking at a better kind of a dialogue, space for dialogue.
Right. And though it sounds crude these days, but there's something called interfaith dialogue. I
Yes,
know it sounds very crude.
yes,
Yeah.
that's
But
right.
that's working actually in some
Exactly.
places.
Yes, exactly what I had in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe if I can add one thing, this
Sure.
point of interfaith dialogue, I think in Bengal too, we have a history, I mean, a tradition of, interfaith dialogue, of understanding the other, and maybe those trends and those traditions are not in the mainstream, but for example, the Bauls, we can see those groups there, Hindus, Muslims, those identities collapse, fuse, we can say. And even in the literary field also, we can see that, people are engaging. For example, in Bengal itself, the first Quran is translated by Girish Sen, and so this attempt to understand the other, and there was also Rajaul Karim and others, they were also, were very much, for inter-community dialogue and understanding. So that maybe what we can do is that we can foreground those dialogues. Kiti Mohan Sen has a very important article, মধ্যযুগে মধ্যযুগের ভারতে হিন্দু মুসলিম সাধনার ঐক্য, perhaps the name of that article. Fascinating article, So maybe we can foreground those, those attempts at dialogue, at understanding more, and yeah, I think that can be one way out from this. That's my only submission.
Yeah, that's true. Bengal has a long history. Thank you for pointing that out, But what I'm noticing nowadays, many on both sides of the divide, many would call such attempts as weakness,
I see your point. Yeah.
right? I mean, that's what we are noticing. The moment you want to engage in a dialogue, that becomes weakness, because the world is so at the moment full of conflict and hot-headedness that it becomes almost impossible to talk about reconciliation, dialogue. These things are almost absent at this. I mean, no one takes them seriously at this point in time. That is the sad part about today's world. Immediately you are seen as someone who's very weak, who doesn't have a spine to talk about. Of course, we are all political subjects, but then, sometimes politics may not allow that kind of a space to negotiate, to sit down and talk. That can happen outside, right? Think of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa.
Yeah.
Something where you just sit and talk. You just vent out whatever you have gone through, for years. Both communities, they can just sit together and they can talk. That, for me, also is a spiritual activity, actually, in some ways.
Yeah.
That process of talking. Yeah. Right, but I'm not a religious scholar, so I really can't say much on this. Because I'm a literary scholar, so my forte is very different. Yeah.
Any other question? If you have, please come forward. I don't think we have any more questions. So here we end our session. I thank Dr. Khan profusely for this talk and this dialogue. And I would also like to thank Dr. Rafat Ali for joining the discussion. So this is the end of the first day of the conference, and I thank everybody, the audience, for joining us. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Mursid. And I feel bad that I couldn't attend any of the sessions today. Hopefully, I may be able to make it to a couple of them tomorrow, because things have been so tight. And if I see one person here, I'm sorry, this is not related to the conference, but there I can see the name of one Miss Alia Chaudhary. Miss Chaudhary, can you hear me? Is she around? I don't know. Okay, this is about another conference.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening. Are you the one who sent me an email, by the way, regarding the conference at OP Jindal?
Yes.
Yeah, I may not have responded yet. It has been so tight last few days. I just couldn't respond to any of the emails. So I'm taking this opportunity here. So I saw you. That's why, I'll respond tomorrow. Tomorrow onward, I'm a little free now. And okay, thank you so much. I'm so sorry about this.
Thank you, sir.
And Mursid and others, Dr. Ali and others, we are also organizing a conference, but that is full of politics, of course. in OP Jindal, and I can share the once more. If you want, I would love to have you, in the conference. It's on post 9/11, Muslim identity in a very complicated world. On that,
I would love to be part of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Please just share the details.
Okay, would it be ethical to share it over here in the comment over here, the link to the call for papers and all that, the details?
I will give it to Hassan. Hassan can share it with you.
Yeah, okay, I can do that. Yes.
Sure.
Share
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
okay. Thank you so much, guys, everyone, and thank you, Base, once more. Take care and all the best.
Thank you,
And
Mosarrap.
Mursid, I'm halfway through your story, and I didn't get time. I just stopped there.
Okay.
But now my semester is over. I'm free, and
Okay.
I'm going to do it now. Okay. I really am enjoying reading your translation. It's such a complex story. It's really, even I was thinking, how would I have done this? You know, this is very difficult story, especially the language. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
so I'm going to be in touch with you shortly.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, of course, Mosarrap. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Over to you, Hassan.
Thank you. As we conclude our final session, I wish to express my heartfelt gratitude to the both of the chair and speaker for their valuable contribution to this insightful and informative discussion. As we are near to the end of the first day international conference, I, Tanya Parveen, research scholar, take honor to extend a formal expression of gratitude through the vote of thanks. We draw the curtains on the first day of this enlightening conference. I stand before you with a heart full of gratitude. First and foremost, I extend our deepest appreciation to Dr. Moniul Islam for gracing us with his insightful speech. I extend my heartfelt thanks to our session chairs, Dr. M.D. Murshid Alam, Dr. Rafat Ali, Sheikh Shagir Ali, and Professor Saifullah for their invaluable contributions in the chairing of the session with grace and wisdom. Our sincere gratitude goes out to the speakers, Dr. Sheikh Mehdi Hassan, Dr. Shami Mohammed, Dr. Washim Sajjad, and Dr. Mosarrap Hossain Khan for sharing their profound insights and enriching our understanding of diverse topics. Your intellectual contributions have added immense value to this conference. A special thanks to Sheikh Kobita, Anwar Hossain, Samia Roshni, Shomi Akhtar, and Sheikh Hafizul for skillfully moderating the session and ensuring the smooth flow of the discussions. A heartfelt thank you extend to the dedicated members of BASE who work tirelessly behind the scenes. Without the unwavering support and laborious effort of individuals such as Abu Saleh, Hashan Dhawa, Qazi Muhammad Sarif, Shaheen Sheikh, Sheikh Kavita, Moniul Islam, and all other executive members of BASE of this conference would not have been possible. Your dedication and efforts have significantly contributed to the success of this conference. I extend thanks to all the participants who actively engaged in the discussion, asked thoughtful questions, and shared their perspectives. Your enthusiasm and participation have been crucial in making this conference a vibrant and intellectually stimulating event. Lastly, I express gratitude to BASE and the Department of English, B.R. Ambedkar College, for organizing this conference and providing a platform for the scholar to exchange their ideas. We look forward to another day of the stimulating discussions and intellectual exploration. Thank you all for being part of this academic endeavor. We eagerly anticipate the sessions tomorrow and hope for continued collaboration and learning. Have a nice day. Good night, all. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. আবু কেমন আছো?
এই দাদা চলে যাচ্ছে।